Okay, this is a condensed version of a large study that we did of Buncombe County, North Carolina, and the tax inequity discoveries that we found. So let me just go ahead and just blast through this. We did this as a pro bono analysis back in 2021. Um, and our company focuses on visualization of information. So if I can show you your brain with your brainstem activity in blue and your creative thought process in green, can I do an economic MRI of your place? So what we typically do is sort of our bread and butter is economic analyses countywide for a place. But this is how people typically talk about real estate. This is my county. This is Buncombe County, North Carolina, home to Asheville, North Carolina. And you have low value in green. I've got non-taxable in gray. So this is Mount Mitchell Federal Park right here. So it's non-taxable. Green is low value. Purple is high value. This is the Biltmore estate. That's a $100 million property that's super potent or super valuable, but is a potent, right? So $100 million is a lot of money. This is its value per acre. So it's actually not that productive. When you do a three-dimensional model of our productivity, you can see where our downtown is. So this is how we help people understand the economics of land use. Our methodology and ethos is to show you the information and not just talk about it. So after the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd in 2020, our city and our county adopted reparations. I think we were the first and only city and county to do so. This had national headlines. I've got emails from friends all around the country that were asking me, they were congratulating us on this and saying, "Isn't this awesome?" Our history, our history of our community, we've had redlining here. So this is very present here in Asheville and Buncombe County to talk about this. But here's the question: what are we doing about it? So our company, I just volunteered to do this analysis with our team. We put about 200 hours, maybe 300 in the analysis. But first rule is to start with race, a race map. This is a race map of our county. Black people are in green, white people are in white. Biltmore Forest is a pretty obvious spot right here, or Biltmore Estate is this area that the city sort of bends around. What a lot of people don't realize is that Biltmore Forest is its own town inside our county. It's predominantly white. It's also its own subdivision. It's sort of, think of it as a real estate development project that the Vanderbilts undertook when they did the Biltmore Estate. So it's an enclave, a very wealthy enclave. Sidney Powell had a house in Biltmore Forest when we did this analysis, and this is my friend Reggie's house in Shiloh. So here's Reggie's and here's Sydney's house. So if you just look at the two of them side by side, you see a dramatic difference in houses. In Sydney's house, Miss Powell's house is nothing to write home about. It's just a ranch house, if you will. So if you look at the data on this, however, so this checks out. The land value per acre is more potent in Biltmore Forest than it is in Shiloh for the dirt, which you would expect. But when you look at the architecture, however, how is Reggie's house worth more than Sydney's house per square foot? And I brought this up to our assessor, and the assessor said, well, she's got more square footage. And I responded, well, this isn't like toilet paper. It doesn't get cheaper by the bulk. This is a bias that's baked into the system. This sort of economic gift that happens to the larger houses. Now, this results in a larger tax production in Shiloh per acre versus Sydney's house. So Reggie's house is paying more dollar for dollar per square inch than Sydney's is. Now here's the kicker. In North Carolina, we do our assessments every 4 years. So from last assessment to this assessment, Reggie's has almost doubled, or actually more than doubled, the value growth of Sydney's house. And on the actual property card, she's renovated and Reggie clearly hasn't. So what's going on here? What is happening in the system where Reggie's house is apparently more desirable than Sydney's house? And this has an economic result in basically separating wealth and protecting wealth in our community versus overcharging lower wealth individuals. So this is an actual detail, grabbing a couple of properties, looking at the whole county in all of housing stock. This is how it works out. So for my county, there's this sort of, I call it a J curve. It looks like a J on its side. But if you buy a house, if you're lucky enough to buy a house for $225,000, it's going to be assessed at $225,000. That's what the mathematical analysis shows of our assessment process. If you buy a house of less value, it's essentially going to get jacked up in assessment and an overcharge of $1 million. And if you're wealthy beyond $225,000 of house, you actually get a little discount of close to $6 million. So if we're talking about reparations, the first rule of reparations is do no harm. The second rule is do the math and understand what the economic effect is. So by adopting our assessment for the next 4 years, from 2021 to 2025, this will be an overcharge of $7 million in the system, a gift, if you will, to the most high wealth individuals in our community. This is not fair. Now, if you think that this is just happening as an analysis across the model, you can actually look at the state law and see how we do the math. That, you know, by law, the true value is our assessed value. So what would somebody pay for the house in an open and willing exchange? That's it. That's the law. Our market value, our taxable value, is the market value. So let's walk through some examples. This is a house in a low wealth neighborhood. Here's what the computer model. So we have every assessor's office has this thing called a computer automated mass appraisal system, or CAMA model. This is what our CAMA computer model said. Think of it as a large Excel spreadsheet. Now, we had a test that they actually sold the same year. So this is what the market showed that value was. So be it not for that transaction, that individual would have overpaid for their government 16% on an annual basis. This is the overcharge on low wealth houses. Now, the assessor got a chance to correct it. So a human came in and corrected it and brought it to 100%. Here's another example. What the sale price was, the computer underassessed it, and the human brought it up to 100%. Okay, that seems fair. That seems to be following the law and what we saw earlier. So let's go to see how this assessment process is happening with high wealth individual houses. And we have to change the scale here because they're bringing in different prices now. This is a house that sold for 2.5 million. This is what the computer model said. So if the computer model is essentially off by 50%, that's a 50% discount. If your child brought home a test score of 50%, wouldn't you be curious enough to figure out what's going wrong there? And this is the point that we raised with our government, was that they need to interrogate the tax model because it's programmed to do a certain thing. Now, when you look at the human who had a test score sitting right there, this is what the human repriced that house at. Again, you see the bias of the human individual. So if this is the practice of what our assessors are doing when they have a test score, of course, they're probably not going to interrogate the model because they have a similar bias to it. And here's another example. You know, we see this all over the place. This the last one here really gets me. To have the fortitude to just only bring it up one whole percentage point. Thank you very much. You know, it's just appalling to see this in our tax system. Now, what this means is that individual on the far right is getting subsidized a good 46% of a discount. Or looking at the prop person on the far left, that person's paying full freight and covering that subsidy, or that person and several neighbors. So we ran the math on that. It's that individual and also 5 parcels around it to cover the subsidy of one person living on the side of a mountain. This isn't hard to interrogate. In fact, there's software that we use that the assessors have. It's called Esri software. It's a brilliant software. In fact, the assessors produce all the mathematics that we can actually produce this map. And if you just do this one analytic of what's the value change in dirt or land value in 1 year, you can see this one individual. There's nothing that could happen on this land that could make that value pop up like this. Use this model to analyze and see what's going on. Now, when you drill into this model, you can actually see other patterns. So here's where I'm sitting right now in my office. If we're to walk across the street or across the highway into my neighborhood, notice how you just go a couple blocks in and a little piece of my neighborhood shoots up. When we show this to the assessor responded by saying, that's a different tax neighborhood code. So hold the phone for a second. Inside my neighborhood, there are separate neighborhood codes inside the neighborhood. And you can see the dramatic difference just by crossing a property line. So if you drill in, we'll just show one property side by side. Here they are. So when you cross this property line from one house to the other, that's a 200% difference in the change of land. Now, there's a couple of questions we need to ask. One is, who drew this boundary? Why does this boundary exist to have a separate neighborhood inside my neighborhood? This is tantamount to what we see with redlining, that somebody draws a map and there's an economic effect of what happens on one side of a boundary versus another side of the boundary. And that's not fair. This is also causing an inequitous practice inside our our tax models. So back to Reggie's neighborhood, one of the things that you see here in Reggie's neighborhood, how all of the tax neighborhood codes are level. So this is what we call gentrification, that, hey, Joe, it's not my fault. It's somebody brought a property in that neighborhood. Therefore, all houses in that neighborhood are the same value. Okay, fine. When you cross Hendersonville Road and you get into Biltmore Forest, why does that not happen as practice in that neighborhood? We clearly see two transactions here, but the rest of that green area does not get affected the way that it happens on the east side. So this is a practice bias where the assessor is practicing one form of the policy on one side of the street and a different form of policy on the other. So our Constitution says that our tax system needs to be uniform. It needs to be consistent across the whole model. So drilling into Biltmore Forest, here's one of my favorite properties. It's a 22-acre parcel on the Blue Ridge Parkway. This is oceanfront real estate for us. This is a 16,000 square foot house with a 2,500 square foot finished basement in it. So let's just look at his tax bill. So in 2011, this building was worth $3.9 million. And by 2021, it's actually dropped in value a full quarter of its price. So it's lost a quarter of its value over 10 years. Now, here's the other thing that's a kicker. This probably should be about a $25 million property. There's no way that this is a $3 million property. So you've got two things going on here. One is this is way undervalued, which means a significant tax break on this property. But secondly, it's losing value. How is that true? And it's not just this property. We modeled all of the value change in all of Biltmore Forest, and you can see all of the properties that are losing value. There are some that are gaining value, but the majority, 55% of the properties in Biltmore Forest have lost value for a net loss of $40 million. So doing the math on that, that's a discount, that's a gift, that's a tax break on those properties and the ones that least need it, if you ask me. So back to Reggie's neighborhood, that Shiloh is overpaying $1.5 million in the tax system. That is not fair. And Biltmore Forest is undercharged $4.4 million. So there's definitely a class bias inside our system. $4.4 million is 111 school teachers that are being given away to this neighborhood. So the system definitely has a class bias in it, but is it racist? I find that when folks talk about real estate or particularly housing, we're essentially talking about checkers in the middle of a chess match. We're not on the same page. When you look back at the white and black households in our community, black households are in green, white households are in blue. You can see that white households have $20,000 more value at the top of the middle of their market versus black households. But let's apply that J curve again to see who's being overcharged and who's being undercharged. And you can see that the majority of black households are being overtaxed with 2.4% escaping that burden. But if you're white, you're 8 times more likely to see that benefit. So this tells me the data shows that there is definitely a race bias still baked into our system. So back to the red line map, we can clearly see that green line neighborhoods are not changing that much compared to yellow and red line neighborhoods are far outstripping what's going on in the green line neighborhoods. And there shouldn't be, it's not like our wealthy neighborhoods aren't desirable, but that's what the math shows. The math shows that nobody wants to buy that stuff. So it's not changing that much in value. And back to the biases. While we were doing the analysis, one of the members of our team actually took the test to be an assessor, and he sent me this screenshot. This is flat out appalling that they are teaching this standard of neighborhoods that apparently there's only 4 classes of neighborhood. Red is declining, yellow is stable, blue is doing better, and green is the good stuff. So those same 4 colors match our redlining map. This pattern of bias is trained in the system, and we need to have a discussion about this. We actually raised this to Larry Clark, who's retired now, but it was the head of research for the IAAO, where I basically said quite bluntly, Larry, y'all need to stop training this stuff. Now I'm a member of the IAAO, and this is something that we need to see as a higher level of discussion and the roots of where all of this goes and where this comes from inside the system. We have to face that cold truth. So just to close, I want to close with a quote from James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. This is not easy stuff to talk about. This is not polite or comfortable, if you will. But we need to talk about who's got the sticker gun and who's pricing things. And how did this happen? Because this is the root of all of our government. This is how we pay for things. in our community. We shouldn't be overburdening those that can least afford it. So thank you for your time. Thank you for letting me do some math, and I'm going to go ahead and end the recording.